Every species reaches the quiet after.
The moment they finally stop fighting. Then you've spent 8 months studying the wrong species.
The Muran had a word for the moment a civilization breaks. Cache. It translated roughly as the quiet after, the point when a species realizes it has lost not just the battle, but the will to continue fighting. Every civilization the Muran had ever conquered had reached Cache. Some reached it fast, one decisive engagement, one catastrophic loss, and the fight drained out of them like water from a cracked bowl. Others took longer, months, occasionally years, but they all reached it. That was the Muran's foundational military doctrine, the belief that had carried them across 11 star systems and 43 conquered worlds. Everything breaks. You simply had to apply enough pressure in the right places for long enough. Cache was inevitable. It was mathematics. Supreme Commander Teval had never once doubted this. He stood in his flagship's command center looking at the tactical display for the Kepler offensive, humanity's fourth major defensive engagement in 8 months. And he felt the particular satisfaction of a man watching a proof complete itself. Human losses were significant. 3 of their 7 primary defense stations destroyed. 2 colony worlds evacuated under fire. Their fleet had been reduced by 40% from first contact numbers. The math was clean. The math was always clean. His intelligence officer, a quiet Muran named Sev, approached with the latest intercept analysis. Communications pulled from human military channels. Morale assessments. Resource projections. Their command staff is still broadcasting, Sev said. Of course they are, Teval said. They haven't accepted it yet. He turned back to the display. 8 months of steady pressure. For engagements. 40% fleet reduction. Cache was close. He could feel the shape of it, the way you feel weather changing. He simply needed to push once more. Admiral Ren Nakamura received the Muran's terms at 0300 hours, station time, in a command center that smelled like recycled air and burned circuitry. The terms were generous by conquest standards. Civilian populations would be relocated, not destroyed. Infrastructure would be absorbed rather than leveled. The Muran, to their credit, preferred functional worlds over rubble. It was a practical mercy, but it was mercy of a kind. Nakamura read the terms twice, set them down, picked up a cold cup of coffee that had been sitting on the console for 4 hours, and finished it. Around her, the command staff worked in the particular silence of people who were too tired for noise. Lieutenant Hara had been awake for 31 hours. Commander Ellis had a bandage above his left eye from a console impact during the last engagement. The station's main display showed the current disposition of what remained of the human fleet, scattered, repositioned, running on reduced power to mask signatures. They looked beaten. They were not beaten. Nakamura pulled up the response channel. Admiral, it was Hara from across the room, not looking up from his board. Muran fleet is holding an engagement distance. They're waiting for the response. I know. If we don't respond within the hour, they'll interpret silence as refusal and begin the final offensive. I know that too. Hara finally looked up. What are we going to do? Nakamura looked at the display. 40% fleet reduction. 3 stations gone. 2 colonies evacuated. 8 months of fighting a military that was older, larger, and had never once in its history failed to break what it set out to break. She thought about Cache. She'd read the Muran doctrine files after first contact. Intelligence had translated them in week 2. She'd read about the quiet after. The moment a species decides it's finished. She understood the concept completely. She also understood that it had never been modeled on humans. Tell them, she said, that we're sending a response. Teval received the human response expecting one of 2 things, surrender or silence. He got a data package. It took his analysis team 4 minutes to process it, which was unusual. Muran processing systems were fast. The delay was because the package was large. Larger than any communication they had received from humanity in 8 months of engagement. Sev brought the summary in person. He set it on the command console in front of Teval without saying anything, which was how Teval knew it was bad. The package was not a surrender. It was a production report. 312 pages. Detailed. Sourced. covering the 8 months of conflict with the specificity of a species that documented everything compulsively, including things that should have broken their spirit and hadn't. Nakamura had attached a single-page cover note, translated into Muran Standard, which read, "You've been watching our losses. We thought you should see the rest." Tevel read the summary. In 8 months of absorbing 40% fleet losses, humanity had built 61 new ships. Not started, built, commissioned, and operational. Their industrial base, which Muran intelligence had assessed as adequate but not exceptional, had been running triple shifts since week 3 of the conflict. They had converted civilian manufacturing infrastructure, cargo haulers, transit platforms, atmosphere processors, into weapons production without public announcement, without panic, and without slowing down. The 3 destroyed defense stations had already been replaced by 4. The 2 evacuated colony worlds had used their evacuation window to establish secondary supply lines that were now fully operational. Tevel turned to the next section. Personnel numbers. 8 months ago, humanity's active military had stood at roughly 1.2 million across all branches. Attrition from 4 major engagements had reduced that by an estimated 22%. Current active military personnel, 2.8 million. Tevel read that number again. They had recruited, trained, and deployed more soldiers in 8 months of active war than they had lost. Not to replace losses. On top of replacing losses, the war had not depleted them. It had mobilized them. He turned to the final section. It was a projection. Nakamura's strategic assessment team had modeled the next 18 months of conflict using Muran engagement doctrine, the same doctrine Tevel had applied for 8 months, and calculated the outcome under 3 scenarios. In all 3 scenarios, the human numbers grew. In all 3 scenarios, Muran numbers held steady or declined because the Muran were an efficient military that did not over-recruit, that did not run triple industrial shifts, that had never in 43 conquests needed to account for an enemy that responded to being hit by building more. The projection was not aggressive. It wasn't a threat. It was just math. Clean math. Tevel set the document down. He looked at the tactical display showing humanity's fleet, 40% smaller than 8 months ago, repositioned, running low signatures. He looked at the projection. He understood, in a way that arrived all at once rather than gradually, that he had been measuring the wrong thing this entire time. He had been watching what humanity lost. He had never once thought to watch what humanity built while it was losing. Sev stood quietly at his elbow. "Sir," he said, "do we proceed with the final offensive?" Tevel looked at the number. 2.8 million. Triple shifts. 61 ships. He had spent his entire career waiting for Koshe. He had never once considered that some species don't have a word for it. The Muran fleet withdrew on the 43rd day of the Kepler standoff. No announcement. No formal communication. The tactical display on Nakamura's command center simply showed them pulling back, slowly, in the deliberate way of a force that is choosing retreat rather than being forced into it. Holding their dignity. Keeping their formation. Nakamura watched them go. She didn't order a pursuit. She'd had the conversation with her senior staff 3 days ago when the withdrawal started looking probable, and the conclusion had been unanimous. Let them leave. This wasn't about destruction. It was about the Muran understanding something they'd never had to understand before. They needed to carry that knowledge home intact. She poured herself a coffee, a real one, hot, from a small supply they saved for significant moments, and stood at the main display as the last Muran signature crossed out of engagement range. Hara came to stand beside her. He looked at the empty display where a fleet had been. "Think they'll come back?" he asked. "Maybe," Nakamura said. "Different terms, probably. What do we do if they do?" She thought about the production report. The 61 ships. The 2.8 million. The triple shifts running in facilities on 7 worlds, staffed by people who had never held a uniform before 8 months ago, and who had shown up anyway. She thought about Koshe, the quiet after. "The same thing we did this time," she said. She drank her coffee. Outside, in the dark, the new ships were still being built, because that's what humans do when the universe tries to break them. They don't reach the quiet after. They get louder. They build more. And they do not, under any circumstances, ever stop.